What happens when a billionaire's empire is on the verge of collapse? Benedict Shaw, a man who commanded the world from his Manhattan penthouse, was about to find out. With a deal worth $9 billion on the line, the one person he needed, his world-renowned translator, vanished. As panic set in and his German counterparts prepared to walk, his last hope came from the most unexpected person imaginable, his maid. A woman he never bothered to learn the name of. He thought she was there to clean up his messes, but he was about to discover she was the only one who could save him from the biggest mess of his life. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the day a titan of industry learned that true value is often hidden in plain sight. The air in Benedict Shaw's penthouse apartment was different from the air the rest of New York City breathed. Filtered, temperature-controlled, and costing more per cubic foot than most people's rent, it was the air of invincibility. From his perch on the 85th floor of 150C7, overlooking a toy-sized Central Park, Benedict felt like a modern god pulling the strings of his tech empire InnovateX with a series of taps on his phone. Today, however, that feeling was gone. Today the air was thick with the metallic taste of fear. His suit, a custom-tailored Brioni that cost as much as a small car, felt like a straitjacket. His Patek Philippe watch, usually a comforting weight on his wrist, felt like a manacle each tick, counting down to his professional execution. "Chloe, where is he?" Benedict barked into his phone, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous minimalist living room. The room was decorated in shades of grey and chrome, a space designed for impressing, not for living. On the other end of the line, his executive assistant, Chloe Vance, sounded frazzled. "I don't know, Mr. Shaw. Dr. Finch's phone is going straight to voicemail. His office isn't picking up. His wife hasn't heard from him since he left this morning. I've sent a car to his home in Scarsdale, but they said he's not there." Benedict paced across the polished marble floor, his reflection a distorted blur of anxiety. Not there? The Helios Dynamics delegation is due in 55 minutes. Klaus Richter is not a man who tolerates tardiness, Chloe. He's German, for God's sake. He probably arrived in New York 3 days ago just to be on time. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the culmination of a year of brutal, soul-crushing negotiations. Helios Dynamics. A German manufacturing behemoth was on the brink of acquiring InnovateX's struggling hardware division. The deal was worth $9 billion. More importantly, it was the cash infusion that would keep the rest of Benedict's company from imploding under a mountain of debt he had accrued during a series of ambitious but failed ventures. The press called him a visionary. His accountants called him dangerously over-leveraged. "Find another translator," Benedict commanded, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed but now slightly damp hair. "Mr. Shaw, Dr. Alistair Finch, is the best technical and legal German translator on the East Coast. He's been prepping for this for months. He knows the nuances of the patent agreements. Finding a replacement with that level of expertise on an hour's notice is impossible." "Make the impossible happen, Chloe. That's what I pay you for," he roared before hanging up with a vicious jab of his thumb. He slumped onto a stark white leather sofa, burying his face in his hands. He was 42 years old, a self-made billionaire who had clawed his way to the top from a middle-class background in Ohio. He was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly dependent on the ecosystem of experts he had built around himself. Without his lieutenants, his lawyers, and today, his translator, he was just a man in an expensive suit, suffocating in a gilded cage. It was in this moment of private despair that he first became aware of her. She was a ghost in his periphery, a silent presence he registered, but never truly saw. Serena Washington had been cleaning his penthouse 3 days a week for the past 6 months. He knew her only as the cleaning lady. He wasn't even sure if he'd ever made direct eye contact with her. She would arrive after he left for the office and be gone before he returned, leaving behind the scent of lemon polish and an unnerving sense of order. But today, with the meeting moved to his penthouse for a power play that was now backfiring spectacularly, their schedules had overlapped. Serena moved with a quiet efficiency that was almost unnerving. She wiped down the vast, empty surfaces of his home, her movements fluid and economical. She was a black woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with her hair tied back in a simple bun. She wore a plain grey uniform. She was in Benedict's world part of the scenery, as inanimate as the multi-million-dollar Joan Miro painting on the wall. He watched her now, her focus entirely on her task. She was cleaning the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered his billion-dollar view. He felt a flicker of irritation. How could she be so calm, so methodical, when his world was crumbling? The sheer injustice of it grated on him. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus Thorne, his ambitious vice president of operations. "Benedict, any word?" Marcus's voice was slick with a practiced but ultimately false sympathy. "Nothing. Finch has disappeared off the face of the earth." "Catastrophic," Marcus said, with a little too much relish. "Klaus Richter will see this as the ultimate sign of disrespect. These old-world Germans, they value punctuality above all else. This could kill the deal before it even starts." "Don't you think I know that, Marcus?" Benedict snapped. "I'm just saying maybe we should postpone. Blame a security issue, a gas leak, something. No. Postponing shows weakness. Richter will smell blood in the water. He'll renegotiate the price. We proceed. We stall. We pray." He hung up again, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. Marcus was circling just like the other sharks on his board. They saw his desperation. If this deal failed, they wouldn't just fire him. They would feast on the remains of his company. He looked up, and his eyes met Serena's for the first time. She was standing by his large glass-topped desk, where stacks of documents for the Helios deal were laid out. She had been dusting, but she had paused, her gaze fixed on the cover page of one of the binders. The title was printed in both English and German. Vertrauliche Vereinbarung über die Übernahme, Helios, Dynamics and Innovatex. Benedict felt a surge of irrational anger. "Don't touch those." He bit out his voice, harsher than he intended. "They're confidential." Serena pulled her hand back, as if the binder were red hot. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just dusting." Her voice was soft, low, and held no trace of an accent he could place. It was just clear. She immediately went back to her work, her composure absolute. But Benedict had seen it, a flicker of something in her eyes. Not just idle curiosity, recognition. He dismissed it as a projection of his own spiraling paranoia. What could she possibly know? He went back to his phone, frantically searching for translation services agencies, anything. Every call was a dead end. "Mr. Shaw," Chloe said, her voice trembling on the line a few minutes later. "The Helios delegation is in the lobby. They're on their way up." The blood drained from Benedict's face. It was over. All of it. The years of work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. It was all going to end in a penthouse in Manhattan because one man didn't show up for work. The private elevator dinged, signaling their arrival. Benedict stood up, straightened his tie, and composed his face into a mask of calm authority. It was the best performance of his life. He walked towards the foyer to greet the men who were about to ruin him. Klaus Richter was exactly as Benedict remembered, tall, impeccably dressed in a severe dark suit with piercing blue eyes and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite. He was flanked by his 2 top aides, both looking equally stern and unforgiving. Herr Shaw. Richter said, his voice a low rumble. His English was perfect, but carried the weight of his native tongue. It is good to see you again. He did not offer a smile. Klaus, Benedict said, extending a hand that was miraculously steady. Welcome, please come in. As the German stepped into the living room, which had been converted into a makeshift boardroom, Benedict's mind was racing. Stall. Say anything. Compliment the weather. Offer them a drink. Just don't let them start talking business. Richter's eyes scanned the room, noting the absence of a key player. Your celebrated translator, Dr. Finch, he is not joining us today. The question hung in the air, a guillotine waiting to drop. Benedict opened his mouth to lie, to spin a story about a sudden family emergency. But before a single word could escape his lips, a quiet voice spoke from the side of the room. My apologies, gentlemen. I was just preparing the refreshments. All heads turned. It was Serena. She had moved from the windows to the bar and was arranging glasses on a tray. But it wasn't what she said that caused a stunned silence to fall over the room. It was the language she had said it in. She had spoken in flawless formal German. Meine Entschuldigung, meine Herren. Ich habe nur die Erfrischungen vorbereitet. Klaus Richter's eyebrows shot up. His aides exchanged baffled looks. Benedict Shaw simply stared, his mouth agape, his carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. The ghost in his periphery, the woman who polished his furniture, had just spoken, the one language that could save his entire world. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the city far below. Benedict Shaw felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. He looked from the stunned faces of the German delegation to Serena, who was now calmly placing a pitcher of chilled water on the large glass table. Her expression was neutral, betraying nothing. It was the same placid look she wore when scrubbing a stubborn stain from the floor. Klaus Richter recovered first. He was a man accustomed to surprises in business, but this was of a different order, entirely. He looked at Serena not with the dismissive glance one gives to serving staff, but with a sharp, analytical curiosity. He responded in German, his tone a mix of incredulity and intrigue. Sie sprechen Deutsch. You speak German. Serena met his gaze directly, a flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. Ja, Herr Richter. Fließend. Yes, Mr. Richter. Fluently. Benedict felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a professional exchange. He looked at his own team. His VP, Marcus Thorne, had just arrived and was standing by the door, his jaw slack with astonishment. Chloe, who had followed the Germans up, looked like she might faint. Richter continued testing her. His German became more komplex, more formal. Das ist höchst unerwartet. Herr Shaw hat nicht erwähnt, dass eine so kompetente Linguistin in seinem Haushalt arbeitet. This is most unexpected. Mr. Shaw did not mention that such a competent linguist was employed in his household. The word household carried a subtle probing barb. Serena didn't flinch. She replied smoothly, her diction crisp and perfect. Herr Shaw und ich hatten bisher keine Gelegenheit, meine Qualifikationen zu besprechen. Meine Aufgabe hier ist normalerweise eine andere. Mr. Shaw and I have not yet had the occasion to discuss my qualifications. My duties here are normally of a different nature. The masterful understatement hung in the air. Benedict watched the exchange like a tennis match where he couldn't see the ball. He saw Richter's stern expression soften almost imperceptibly. The German Titan wasn't just hearing a translator, he was hearing a professional, Finally, Richter turned his piercing blue eyes back to Benedict. He switched to English. "Mr. Shaw, you are a man of many surprises." There was no warmth in the statement, but the icy hostility from a moment before had thawed. It was now a neutral observational statement. "Dr. Finch, I presume, has been unavoidably detained." Benedict, jolted back to reality, found his voice. "Yes. A sudden medical issue. My sincerest apologies. It was entirely unforeseen." The lie felt clumsy and weak after the display of effortless competence he had just witnessed. Richter nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to Serena. "And this young lady?" Benedict's mind was a frantic mess. Who was she? What was he supposed to say? "This is Serena. She cleans my toilets, but apparently she's also a UN-level interpreter." He was saved from having to answer. Serena stepped forward slightly, her posture erect and dignified. She looked at Benedict, a silent question in her eyes. It was a look that said, "Do you want me to handle this?" In that moment, stripped of all other options, Benedict made the most important decision of his career. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He was handing the controls of his $9 billion empire to a woman whose last name he still didn't know. Serena turned her attention back to the Germans. "My name is Serena Washington," she said first in English, then repeating it in German. "Dr. Finch's absence was indeed sudden. If you are willing, I would be honored to facilitate your conversation with Mr. Shaw today." Marcus Thorne, the VP, finally found his voice. He took a step forward, a sneer barely disguised as concern on his face. "Benedict, are we sure about this? This is a highly technical negotiation. We need a certified professional, not an amateur." He let the word hang in the air, dripping with condescension. Before Benedict could respond, Klaus Richter spoke his voice, cutting through the tension like a razor. "I will be the judge of her competence, Mr. Thorne." He gestured to the chair opposite him, a chair intended for Dr. Finch. "Miss Washington, please." It was a command, but it was also an invitation, an acceptance. Serena walked to the table. She didn't sit in the main chair, but took a slightly smaller one that Chloe had discreetly pulled up, positioning herself between Benedict's side of the table and Richter's. It was a subtle, brilliant move. She wasn't claiming to be a negotiator. She was positioning herself as a neutral conduit, a professional. Benedict sat down, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The meeting began. Richter started with a formal preamble, a long and winding statement in German about the history of their two companies, the mutual respect and the seriousness of the final phase of their agreement. It was filled with corporate jargon and formal pleasantries. Benedict expected Serena to provide a simple summarized translation. He was wrong. When Richter finished, Serena leaned slightly towards Benedict, and in a low, clear voice began to translate. It was flawless. She didn't just translate the words, she captured the intent. "Mr. Richter begins by expressing his gratitude for your hospitality," she started. "He acknowledges the long journey both Helios Dynamics and Innovatex have taken to reach this final critical stage. He emphasizes that for Helios this is not merely a financial transaction, but a strategic partnership built on a foundation of, and he uses the word gegenseitige, respect, mutual respect. He is setting a formal, very traditional tone, stressing the gravity of the occasion." Benedict was floored. Dr. Finch would have just said, "He's happy to be here and wants to get started." Serena had given him the subtext, the cultural nuance. She had armed him. The conversation moved to the first agenda item, the transfer of intellectual property for Innovatex's proprietary microprocessing chips. Richter's technical advisor, a severe-looking man named Herr Schmidt, launched into a highly detailed query in German citing specific patent numbers and engineering protocols. Marcus Thorne smirked, leaning back in his chair. This was it. This was where the cleaning lady would be exposed. But Serena listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She made a few quick notes on a pad she'd been given. When Schmidt finished, she turned to Benedict. Herr Schmidt is raising a concern about patent EU 74B subsection C relating to the coolant system for the primary processor. He is asking for confirmation that the patented process does not rely on any third-party technologies that are not explicitly included in the asset transfer agreement. He is specifically worried about a potential licensing conflict with a competitor, Omnicorp. Benedict's own tech expert, who was patched in via video call, began to answer. Serena listened, then translated his complex, jargon-filled English back into precise, technical German. Herr Schmidt listened, nodded, and replied with a follow-up question. The exchange went on for 20 minutes. Serena was a seamless bridge between the two languages, the two cultures, the two teams. She never stumbled. She never hesitated. When a term was ambiguous, she would ask for clarification in a way that was respectful and efficient. Benedict wasn't just watching a translation. He was watching a virtuoso performance. He found himself ignoring his own team and focusing on her. He noticed the way she watched Richter's body language, the way she modulated her tone to match the speaker's. The way her eyes, so often downcast in her other role, were now sharp, intelligent, and completely engaged. The turning point came an hour into the meeting. They were discussing liability clauses. Richter's legal counsel, a formidable woman named Frau Adler, made a statement in German. It was long, dense, and full of legalese. When she finished, Serena turned to Benedict. Her face was grim. Frau Adler has proposed an amendment to Section 12 regarding post-acquisition liability for product defects. Serena said, her voice low and urgent. The original agreement stated a 5-year liability period for Innovatex. She is proposing to extend that to an indefinite period. She paused, then added, she used the term unbefristete Haftung, which translates literally to unlimited liability. But culturally, in this legal context, it's an extremely aggressive move. It implies a deep distrust of your product quality control. Benedict's own lawyer, watching from the video screen, hadn't even flinched. He'd likely have received a summarized, less urgent translation later, and might have glossed over it. But Serena had flagged it, not just as a legal point, but as a cultural red flag. She's also suggesting, Serena continued, looking at her notes, that the burden of proof for any defect claim should rest solely with Innovatex. This is a significant deviation from standard M&A practice. Benedict felt a chill run down his spine. It was a poison pill, a cleverly worded clause that could expose Innovatex to billions in potential future lawsuits. Richter was testing him, seeing if his team was sharp enough to catch it. Thanks to Serena, they were. Benedict looked at his lawyer on the screen. David, your thoughts? Galvanized by Serena's analysis, David's eyes widened. He quickly scanned the document. She's right. That's unacceptable. A complete non-starter. Benedict took a deep breath. He looked directly at Klaus Richter. Serena, please translate for me. Exactly. Serena nodded. Klaus. Benedict said, his voice firm and confident. I appreciate the thoroughness of your legal team. However, the proposal for indefinite liability is, with all due respect, fundamentally contrary to the spirit of this partnership. It is not a point for negotiation. We can revert to the previously agreed-upon 5-year term, or we can conclude our discussions for the day. Serena translated his words. Her German was as firm and uncompromising as Benedict's English. There was no softening, no apology. It was a direct reflection of his strength. A heavy silence descended. Richter stared at Benedict, his blue eyes like chips of ice. He was being challenged, and he wasn't used to it. The deal, the entire $9 billion house of cards, teetered on this single moment. Benedict held his gaze, his heart pounding. He had placed all his chips on the judgment of the woman who cleaned his windows. After what felt like an eternity, Klaus Richter gave a curt, single nod. He spoke one word in German. Serena turned to Benedict. He says, "Understood." And just like that, the tension broke. Frau Adler made a note on her documents. They had conceded the point. They moved on. Benedict felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him lightheaded. He looked at Serena. She hadn't just translated. She had become his most crucial advisor. She had saved him from a catastrophic mistake. He glanced over at Marcus Thorne. The VP's face was a mask of disbelief, and was that resentment? The smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. He had expected Serena to fail, for the deal to crumble, for Benedict to be weakened. Instead, this unknown woman had made Benedict look stronger than ever. The meeting continued for another hour before Richter called for a break. "We will pause for lunch," he announced in English, "and reconvene at 2 p.m. Miss Washington, your linguistic skill is formidable. We are fortunate to have you." It was the highest praise a man like Richter could offer. As the Germans were escorted to a separate dining area, Benedict finally turned to face Serena. His own team was buzzing, talking in hushed, excited tones. But Benedict only had eyes for her. Serena. He began the name feeling new and significant on his tongue. "Where in God's name did you learn to do that?" Serena looked down for the first time that day, a hint of the shy, retiring cleaning lady returning. "I studied, sir. A long time ago." "Studied where? A community college language class?" Marcus chimed in, his tone still dismissive. Serena looked up, and the quiet confidence returned. She met Marcus's gaze without blinking. "No," she said, her voice even. "I had a full scholarship to Georgetown University. I was in my final year at the Walsh School of Foreign Service, majoring in international relations and linguistics, with a focus on Germanic languages." The room fell silent once again. Georgetown School of Foreign Service was arguably the most prestigious program of its kind in the world, a breeding ground for diplomats, CIA analysts, and global leaders. Benedict stared at her, his mind reeling. The woman he paid to scrub his floors had a better education than almost anyone in the room. "You were in your final year?" Benedict asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What happened?" Serena's expression clouded over with a deep, ancient sadness. "Life happened, Mr. Shaw," she said softly. "My mother got sick. Very sick. The kind of sick that insurance doesn't like to cover. I had to drop out and come home to take care of her and my younger brother. I took any job I could find that had flexible hours." She looked around the opulent penthouse at the marble floors she polished, at the glass tables she dusted. This was one of those jobs. The truth of it hit Benedict like a physical blow. He saw it all in a flash, the hubris, the blindness, the sheer staggering arrogance of his own existence. He lived in a palace of glass and steel commanding billions, yet he had never bothered to see the brilliant, struggling human being who was quietly tidying up his world. She wasn't just a maid who happened to speak German. She was a scholar, a diplomat in the making, whose life had taken a cruel and unjust turn. And in his moment of greatest need, She had stepped out of the shadows he had kept her in and saved him. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Shame. Lunch was a tense and surreal affair. The Helios delegation dined in Benedict's formal dining room, while Benedict and his team retreated to the kitchen, a gleaming stainless steel marvel that was usually the exclusive domain of his private chef. Today it was a war room. Chloe had ordered an assortment of high-end sandwiches and salads, but no one was eating. They were all buzzing about what had happened. Georgetown. Chloe kept whispering to herself, shaking her head in disbelief. She was at Georgetown. Marcus Thorne, however, was conspicuously silent. He leaned against a marble countertop, scrolling through his phone with a tight, unreadable expression. While everyone else saw a miracle, he saw a complication. Serena's unexpected competence had bolstered Benedict's position, not weakened it. This was not part of his plan. Benedict, however, couldn't get Serena's story out of his head. Life happened. The simple, devastating phrase echoed in his mind. He'd always believed life was something to be conquered, bent to his will. He'd never considered it as an indiscriminate force that could derail a brilliant mind and trap it in a life of quiet servitude. He found Serena in a small utility closet off the kitchen where she kept her supplies. She was eating a simple sandwich she had packed herself, sitting on an overturned bucket. The contrast was jarring. The woman who had just navigated a multi-billion-dollar negotiation was taking her lunch break next to mops and bottles of bleach. "Serena," he said, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. She stood up quickly, dropping her sandwich back into its wrapper. "Mr. Shaw, I'm sorry, I was just—" "No, please, sit. Eat." He felt a fresh pang of shame. "You should be eating with us." "This is fine, sir. I'm comfortable here." Her professionalism was a shield, protecting her from the awkwardness of the situation. Benedict leaned against the doorframe, feeling like an intruder in his own home. "I wanted to thank you. No, thank you is not enough. You did more than just translate in there. You understood the entire game. That liability clause, you saved us. Millions, potentially billions." She simply nodded. "I was just doing what was needed." "No," he insisted. "You did more. I had no idea. About Georgetown. About any of it." He fumbled for words. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" A wry, tired smile touched her lips for the first time. "What would I have said?" "Mr. Shaw, excuse me, sir, while I'm cleaning your bathroom. I'd like to mention I'm qualified to advise on international acquisitions. You and I live in different worlds. They just happen to occupy the same space sometimes." Her words were not accusatory, but they landed with the force of a judgment. He had built these walls between their worlds, and he had been completely blind to what was on the other side. "That's going to change," he said, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "After this is over, we are going to talk. Properly. About your future." He paused. "But for now, I need you for the afternoon session. I'll pay you, of course. A consultant's fee. Whatever Dr. Finch was getting for the day, you'll get it." Dr. Finch's day rate was $25,000. Serena's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. That amount of money could change everything for her family. "Mr. Shaw, that's not necessary." "It's not only necessary, it's deserved," he said firmly. "Please, join us for the 2 p.m. session." She nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I will." As he walked away, Benedict's gratitude was quickly being replaced by a cold, simmering anger. The day's events still didn't add up. Dr. Alistair Finch was the most reliable man he knew. A former military intelligence officer, Finch treated appointments like tactical operations. He wouldn't just go silent. A sudden medical issue was possible, but the complete vanishing act felt wrong. It felt coordinated. He pulled Chloe aside. "Chloe, I want you to do something for me, and I want you to be discreet. Contact David Chen in security. Tell him I want a full top priority investigation into the disappearance of Dr. Finch. I want to know where he is, what happened to him, and who he spoke to in the last 24 hours. Spare no expense." Chloe's eyes widened. "You think this wasn't an accident? I think in a $9 billion deal there are no accidents," Benedict said grimly. "Someone wanted me to walk into that room today, blind and deaf. Someone wanted me to fail." His eyes instinctively flickered over to Marcus Thorne, who was still engrossed in his phone, a picture of feigned indifference. The afternoon session was even more intense. With the initial pleasantries out of the way, they dove into the most contentious parts of the agreement workforce, integration, asset valuation, and the timeline for the handover of operations. Serena was even more impressive than she had been in the morning. She seemed to grow in confidence with every passing minute. She was no longer just a translator. She was an active participant. On several occasions, she would pause the translation to provide Benedict with critical context. "Mr. Shaw," she'd say quietly, "when Herr Richter uses the word efficient, he doesn't just mean efficient. In a German corporate context, it implies a process that is streamlined, documented, and rigorously optimized. He is implicitly asking about your standard operating procedures." Armed with this insight, Benedict could tailor his answers to resonate with the German mindset, speaking of process and order rather than just results. He could feel the dynamic shifting. Richter was beginning to see him not as a flashy, unpredictable American tech cowboy, but as a serious and detail-oriented leader. The afternoon's masterstroke came during the discussion about Innovatex's key engineers. Richter wanted a 5-year mandatory contract for Benedict's top 20 engineers to ensure a smooth transition. Marcus Thorne eagerly agreed. "Absolutely, Klaus. We can make that happen. They are loyal to the company." But Serena, translating the back and forth, frowned slightly. She leaned over to Benedict while one of Richter's aides was speaking. "Sir, a word of caution," she whispered. "In German labor law, mandatory contract can be a very rigid concept. But in California, where most of your engineers are based, non-compete clauses are largely unenforceable, and forcing a new 5-year contract on them post-acquisition could be seen as duress. It could trigger a mass exodus. They might see it as a golden cage and resent it." She was talking about a clash of legal and corporate cultures that no one else in the room, not even his own lawyers on the video feed, had considered in that moment. Benedict's blood ran cold. A mass exodus of his top talent would gut the value of the very division he was trying to sell. Marcus, in his eagerness to please the Germans, had almost agreed to a catastrophic blunder. Benedict held up a hand. "Serena, please translate." He looked at Richter. "Klaus, I understand your desire for stability. I share it. However, forcing our top talent into inflexible contracts is not the path to retaining them. It is the path to losing them. Instead, I propose we structure a generous retention bonus package tied to performance metrics over a 3-year period. We retain them through incentive, not by force. It is the American way, and it is far more effective." Serena translated his counter-proposal. Her tone was collaborative, not confrontational. She framed it as a bridge between two corporate cultures. Richter listened intently, stroking his chin. He exchanged a look with his team. They saw the logic. It was a smarter, more nuanced solution. "A very astute point, Mr. Shaw," Richter said in English, a rare smile touching his lips. "A retention package is a much more elegant solution. We will have our teams draft a proposal." Benedict felt a surge of triumph. He glanced at Marcus, whose face was pale. The VP knew he had been completely outmaneuvered, not by Benedict, but by Serena. The resentment in his eyes was now unmistakable, a cold, hard glint of hatred. The meeting concluded for the day, on a high note with a clear path forward. As the Germans left, Klaus Richter made a point of stopping in front of Serena. He addressed her in German, his voice full of genuine respect. She listened and replied modestly. When he was gone, Benedict asked, "What did he say?" Serena looked slightly flustered by the attention. He said that in 30 years of international negotiations, he has rarely encountered a translator with such a profound understanding of both language and business strategy. He said, "You are very lucky to have me on your team." On my team, Benedict thought. He had never even considered her part of his world, let alone his team. As the door closed, his phone vibrated. It was a text from David Chen, his head of security. "Mr. Shaw, we have an update on Finch. You need to see this. Secure line in 5 minutes." Benedict's heart began to pound again. He dismissed Marcus and Chloe, telling them to prepare for the final meeting tomorrow. He wanted to be alone for this call. Only Serena remained, quietly packing her bag to leave for the day. "Stay," Benedict said, his voice tight. "I think you should hear this." He answered the video call on his tablet. David Chen's face appeared grim and professional. "David, talk to me." "Sir Dr. Finch is fine. We found him at a service station on the Hutchinson River Parkway. His car had a flat tire, but it wasn't a simple flat." "What do you mean?" Benedict asked. Both of his driver's side tires were slashed. Clean cuts looked like a professional job, designed to disable the vehicle without causing a crash. His phone was also dead. When we checked it, the charging port had been damaged, a tiny bit of conductive material inserted just enough to short it out when he plugged it in overnight. He thought it was just a dead battery. Benedict felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. "Sabotage." "Textbook," Chen confirmed. "It gets worse. We pulled the security footage from outside Dr. Finch's home. At 3:15 a.m., a car drove past slowly. We got a partial plate. It was a black sedan registered to a high-end car service in the city. Can you trace it?" "We already did," Chen said. "The car was booked for a round trip from Midtown Manhattan to Scarsdale and back. It was paid for with a corporate credit card." Chen paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "The card is issued to InnovateX. It's the executive expense account of your Vice President, Marcus Thorne." The world seemed to stop. Benedict looked up from the tablet, his gaze locking with Serena's. She had heard everything. Her eyes were wide with shock and understanding. The pieces all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus's eagerness to postpone, his condescending dismissal of Serena, his near-catastrophic advice in the negotiation. He hadn't just wanted Benedict to fail. He had actively, meticulously engineered it. He had arranged for the translator to be taken out of play gambling, that without his crutch, Benedict would stumble and fall, leaving the company ripe for him to take over in the ensuing chaos. He had never counted on the cleaning lady. A cold, terrifying rage began to build in Benedict's chest. He had been betrayed, not by a competitor, but by his own second-in-command. "Thank you, David," Benedict said, his voice dangerously calm. "Keep this information absolutely secure. No one else is to know. Understand?" "Understood, sir." The call ended. The penthouse was silent. Benedict looked at the gleaming skyline of the city he had thought he commanded. He had been fighting a war on the wrong front, completely oblivious to the traitor standing right beside him. "Mr. Shaw," Serena said softly, her voice pulling him back from the brink. "What are you going to do?" Benedict turned to look at her. In her eyes, he didn't see fear or shock. He saw resilience. He saw clarity, the same clarity that had saved his company just hours before. A plan began to form in his mind, a cold and precise strategy. Marcus wanted to show he was going to get one, and the final act was going to be something no one, least of all him, would ever forget. "Tomorrow," Benedict said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Tomorrow we finish the deal, and then we deal with Mr. Thorne." He knew now that he had a secret weapon, and it wasn't his money or his power. It was the quiet, brilliant woman standing before him who had seen his world more clearly from the shadows than he ever had from his throne. The morning of the final day broke with a crystalline clarity over Manhattan. For Benedict, it felt like the world had come into sharp focus for the first time in years. The betrayal had been a bitter pill, but it had cured him of his blindness. He was no longer just fighting for his company, he was fighting for its soul, and he was fighting to right a profound wrong. He arrived at the office early, but Serena was already there. She wasn't in her cleaning uniform. At Benedict's request, Chloe had met her early that morning for a shopping trip. Serena now wore a simple but elegant, dark navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She looked less like a consultant and more like a diplomat. The transformation was striking. She looked like she belonged. "Good morning, Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice steady. She held a tablet with the latest drafts of the agreement already marked up with her notes. "Good morning, Serena," he replied, looking at her with genuine admiration. "Are you ready?" "I am," she said. There was no hesitation. The final piece of Benedict's plan was Marcus Thorne. The VP arrived shortly after oozing a false bonhomie. He clapped Benedict on the back, a gesture that now felt like a viper's strike. "The big day, Benedict. Let's bring it home," Marcus said, his smile not reaching his cold, calculating eyes. He glanced at Serena, a flicker of contempt crossing his features before he masked it. "Ah, Miss Washington, back for another day of assistance." "Serena is an integral part of this team, Marcus." Benedict said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She will be sitting in on all remaining sessions." Marcus's smile tightened. "Of course, whatever you think is best." He was still confident his plan would work. Even if Serena could handle the basics, he believed the final intricate details of the deal would be beyond her. He was certain he could still find a way to sow chaos. When Klaus Richter and his delegation arrived, the atmosphere was markedly different. The tension of the previous day had been replaced by a sense of purpose. Richter greeted Benedict with a firm handshake, and then turned to Serena, giving her a respectful nod. "Miss Washington, it is a pleasure to see you again." "And you, Herr Richter," she replied in perfect German. The meeting began. They moved swiftly through the remaining points, with Serena translating seamlessly. But Benedict and Serena were both waiting for the one section they had discussed late last night, Schedule 4B, the Personnel Redundancy and Restructuring Clause. It was a standard but sensitive part of any acquisition detailing which positions would be eliminated. Marcus Thorne, as VP of Operations, had been in charge of drafting the list of Innovatex positions deemed redundant. As they reached that section, Marcus leaned forward, taking the lead. "Klaus, as you can see from the list, provided we've identified significant operational synergies. By consolidating roles, we can achieve an estimated 15% reduction in overhead in the first year." He sounded proud, like a general, presenting a successful battle plan. Richter's legal counsel, Frau Adler, began to go through the list in German, asking for clarification on certain roles. Serena translated dutifully. It all seemed routine. Then Richter pointed to a specific line item. He asked a question in German. Serena paused for a fraction of a second longer than usual before she translated. Herr Richter is asking about the elimination of the entire internal auditing department. He notes that it seems unusual to remove the whole department rather than consolidating it with Helios's existing team. He asks for the strategic reasoning behind this. Marcus didn't hesitate. A simple matter of efficiency, he said smoothly. Our internal audit team is small, only 5 people. Their protocols are outdated. It's far cleaner to sunset the department and adopt the more robust Helios standards from day one. Benedict watched Marcus, his face a mask of stone. He knew exactly what was happening. Last night, he and Serena had gone through the list of names. The 5 employees in the internal auditing department were the very people who would have been responsible for reviewing executive expense accounts and internal fund transfers. The people who sooner or later would have discovered the payment to the car service that sabotaged Dr. Finch. Marcus wasn't just streamlining, he was burying his tracks. Now it was time. Serena, Benedict said calmly, please translate for me word for word. She nodded. Benedict looked across the table at Klaus Richter. Klaus, I must apologize. It appears there has been a significant error in the document provided to you. A misjudgment made by one of my executives. He let the words hang in the air. Marcus's head snapped towards him, a look of confusion and alarm on his face. Benedict continued, his voice cold and precise. Innovatex prides itself on integrity and transparency. The decision to eliminate our entire internal auditing department was not a strategic one. It was a self-serving one made by an individual who wished to prevent a review of his own recent, highly irregular activities. Serena's translation was sharp and clinical, each German word landing like a hammer blow. The Helios team looked up, their expressions shifting from businesslike to intensely serious. They smelled trouble. Marcus's face had gone from tan to ashen. Benedict, what are you talking about? This is hardly the time or place for internal performance reviews. Benedict ignored him, keeping his focus on Richter. To ensure our new partnership begins with absolute trust, I am making a change to this schedule effective immediately. Not only are we retaining the entire internal auditing team, but we will also be launching a full top-to-bottom audit of all executive expenses from the last quarter. He then turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his eyes locked with Marcus Thorne's. And, Benedict continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we will be adding one more position to the redundancy list. He paused, the Vice President of Operations. The silence was deafening. Marcus Thorne looked as though he'd been physically struck. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Richter, a man who had seen everything in the world of corporate warfare, understood immediately. This wasn't just a firing, it was an execution. He looked at Benedict, then at the pale, sweating Marcus, and then at Serena, who sat poised and calm. He was witnessing a coup. Benedict, you can't do this, Marcus finally stammered, his voice rising in panic. This is insane. I've been with you for 10 years. And for 9 of those years, I trusted you. Benedict said, his voice laced with ice. Until you decided to risk this entire company to sabotage a $9 billion deal for your own pathetic ambition. He gestured to the door. My security chief is waiting outside Marcus. He has a box for your personal items and a copy of the evidence against you. I suggest you leave quietly. Marcus looked wildly around the room, seeking an ally, but found only the cold, unforgiving stares of the Germans and the stony silence of his now former boss. His eyes finally landed on Serena. It was a look of pure, venomous hatred. He saw her not just as an obstacle, but as the architect of his downfall. He had underestimated the Maid, and it had cost him everything. Without another word, Marcus stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He gave Benedict one last murderous glare, then turned and walked out of the room, a man publicly and professionally destroyed. The door clicked shut behind him. The room remained silent for a long moment. Benedict felt a strange sense of calm. He had excised a cancer. It was Klaus Richter who broke the silence. He spoke in German, his voice low and measured. Serena translated. Herr Richter says that integrity is the single most important asset in any partnership. He says he has never seen a more decisive or necessary act of leadership. He then switched to English himself. Mr. Shaw, your company is in better hands than I realized. It was the ultimate validation. Benedict hadn't just saved the deal, he had earned Richter's deep personal respect. Benedict inclined his head. Thank you, Klaus. Now shall we sign the agreement? A slow smile spread across Richter's face. Yes, let us. The final documents were brought in. As Benedict picked up the expensive fountain pen to sign away a part of his company, he paused. He looked at the signature line for the witness from InnovateX. It was meant for Marcus Thorne. He crossed out the name and title. He looked at Serena. Serena. He said, his voice full of a respect that was now bone deep. I believe this is your rightful place. He slid the document and the pen across the table to her. Serena looked at the document, then at Benedict, her eyes shining with emotion. For years she had been invisible. Today she was being asked to bear witness to one of the biggest deals in the city, a deal she herself had saved. With a steady hand, she signed her name, Serena Washington, and below it she did not write Translator or Consultant. At Benedict's nod, she wrote the title she had earned. Strategic Advisor, InnovateX. The signing of the documents concluded with a quiet finality. As the Helios delegation departed, Benedict dismissed his team, leaving him and Serena alone in the vast penthouse. The air, once thick with panic, was now still with possibility. Serena. Benedict began his voice, filled with a respect that was now bone deep. Come to my study. In the quiet, wood-paneled room, Benedict turned to her, his expression more sincere than she had ever seen. What you did was more than translation. It was strategy, insight, and diplomacy. You saved my company from my own blindness. He didn't hesitate. I'm creating a new senior executive role, head of international communications and strategy. It's yours if you want it. He named a life-altering salary and continued. Furthermore, the company will finance the completion of your degree at Georgetown. We will also establish a fund to cover your mother's medical care and your brother's entire education. Consider it back pay for a talent that has been criminally underutilized. Tears welled in Serena's eyes. The offer wasn't just a job. It was freedom from the crushing weight she had carried for years. It was a new universe. But years of hardship had forged a core of steel within her. She met his gaze, her voice steady, despite her emotion. Benedict, I am overwhelmed and I am grateful. I accept. A smile of profound relief spread across Benedict's face. However, she added, her confidence returning, I have 2 conditions. Benedict nodded, intrigued. Name them. First, she said, I want to oversee the new audit of the executive accounts. The betrayal was a symptom of a cultural problem. I want to help you fix the foundations of this company. Done, Benedict agreed instantly. You'll have my full authority. Second, she continued, I want my old cleaning uniform framed and hung in the main office. Not as a trophy, but as a statement. A statement that a person's value isn't defined by their title or the assumptions people make. So we never become blind again. Benedict stared at her, truly humbled. She wasn't asking for perks. She was asking for responsibility and purpose. She was already a leader. Serena Washington, he said, his voice full of admiration. Your conditions are accepted. He poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed one to her. Welcome to InnovateX. I have a feeling you are going to change everything. She took the glass, her eyes shining with the promise of a future she had earned. I have a feeling you're right. They clinked glasses, the sound sealing a new partnership, one built not on power or money, but on mutual respect and the transformative power of seeing the greatness that hides in plain sight. Benedict Shaw started that day as a billionaire on the verge of losing it all. He ended it richer than he had ever been, but his newfound wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in wisdom. The story of Benedict and Serena is a powerful reminder that we are all surrounded by hidden potential. It lives in the quiet colleague, the overlooked service worker, the person society has labeled and filed away. Serena Washington wasn't just a maid who spoke German. She was a brilliant mind waiting for an opportunity. Benedict Shaw's greatest achievement wasn't closing a $9 billion deal. It was learning to open his eyes. Their story asks us a question. Who in our own lives are we failing to see? If this story moved, you please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true life stories that will inspire and amaze you. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.